From the national headquarters of RT America in our nation's capital, good afternoon. I'm Michelle Greenstein, filling in for Rick Sanchez. We begin tonight with a vicious cycle between the U.S. government and the so-called private tech industry. Apparently, the Pentagon often buys services from some of the very companies it helped create. Apple, Google, Facebook, Microsoft, PayPal, all of these technology giants have relationships with the military intelligence complex. But the relationship I want to focus on tonight is that of the U.S. government and Amazon. There's a new report from Open the Government, an organization that calls itself a coalition for, well, a more open and accountable government. This report details the degree to which Amazon has contracts with the Defense Department and even states that the U.S. government, quote, runs on Amazon. We're going to drill down on that story in just a moment, but first, I want to put this report into some context, because Amazon is just the tip of the iceberg. The iceberg being private technology firms working hand in glove with the U.S. government. Facebook deletes pages at the direction of the U.S. government. Twitter purges thousands of accounts, tens of thousands, after partnering with a think tank funded by NATO. Google was born partially out of CIA and NSA research grants for mass surveillance. In fact, the internet itself is a product of the U.S. government. It's true, the internet started as ARPANET through Pentagon-funded research at MIT and Harvard. It came out of the government's effort to build a system that collects and shares intelligence with the ultimate goal of predicting and even intercepting social or political movements that threaten the status quo. And by the way, the first year ARPANET came online, students at MIT and Harvard actually tried to shut it down, warning that it would be used to spy on Americans and calling it, quote, computerized people manipulation. So, were they right? It's the News with Rick Sanchez, where we drill down on questions like these because it's time to do news again. We begin with this report that says the U.S. government, quote, runs on Amazon. Amazon supplies surveillance and facial recognition software to the FBI, and its servers host the State Department, the National Security Agency, the Center for Disease Control, and the Food and Drug Administration's data. And of course, there's that infamous $600 million deal between Amazon and the CIA. Joining me now is journalist Ben Swan. Ben, what else is this new report from Open the Government telling us?
Well, it's essentially telling us, I like the term you used at the beginning, it's a vicious cycle between Amazon and the U.S. government, where one feeds the other, they continue to feed each other, and they both continue to grow. What we really see in this report is that Amazon is looking at doing about $4.6 billion in business with the U.S. government in just 2019 alone. And even as we've watched Amazon pull back and rescind its decision to put in those New York headquarters after activists there basically pushed back against them, they have not rescinded on building the DC HQ2 headquarters. And the reason for that is because of their growing business with the U.S. government.
You know, something I find interesting is not only does Jeff Bezos own Amazon, he also owns the Washington Post. Now, in theory, media organizations like the Post, especially with such a reputation, they're supposed to be keeping the government in check, correct? They're supposed to be, if anything,
Absolutely.
Revealing government secrets, holding them accountable. How can Amazon be trusted to do such a thing when they are literally under contract to keep government secrets as well?
Right. I don't think they can be at all. In fact, the Washington Post, because of the fact that Bezos owns it, you know, if ever there were a role in government breaking up monopolies and breaking up these institutions that are becoming too large, this is a great example of it, because how can the Washington Post claim that it's ever going to hold government accountable when at the same time, as you said, Amazon is actually keeping government secrets, is developing technologies for that government, and really it's become kind of the poster child for the crony system. You know, consider the fact they have this joint intelligence venture program that Amazon has bid on for $10 billion. That's what they have, this contract they bid on. But in reality, when you look at the RFP for that, the request for proposal, the government wrote that RFP specifically for Amazon. Amazon is the only company in the world, under the way that RFP is written, that would be able to service the contract. And so there have been a huge number of alarms raised about that, the fact that government is actually creating contracts for this company that only enrich it and make it larger and make it bigger. Why would Jeff Bezos allow any of his companies to bite the hand that is feeding him so richly?
Now, I want to take a step back and think about the big picture. In your years of work investigating and uncovering stories like these, could you say that in the past few years, perhaps after the advent of Russiagate, that you've seen this relationship between the tech sector and the U.S. government, specifically the federal government, perhaps intensify?
So intensify is an interesting word. I think it has intensified. I think what we're seeing now is the veil came off, right? There was a veil over how much was government involved in these areas. We know that the U.S. government, as you said in your intro leading up to this, has funded technologies used by Apple, has funded Facebook in the beginning, really caused a lot of these tech companies to come forth in the first place, but had not pulled the trigger on essentially saying we're going to, eliminate all these dissenting voices. What has happened, and I don't think the government necessarily expected this to happen, is that a lot of individuals out there over the early years of these big tech companies, over the early years of social media companies, began to use them to spread information. And there was a lot of free information that I don't think was anticipated. And so the government needed some kind of catalyst to pull back and say, we're going to stop this. Russiagate happened to be that catalyst that they invented in order to do that.
Right. I think even whether or not it was intentional, it definitely served that purpose. Now, finally, I just want to ask you one detail. In this new report by Open the Government, they mentioned something called deep learning, where the CIA is getting technology from Amazon to, in a sense, predict people's behavior. Can you tell us anything about that? Yeah, I mean,
essentially, the CIA is attempting to use artificial intelligence, AI, and that's where all the focus, by the way, of these tech companies is right now, is into artificial intelligence, not using real people, but using predictive methods to determine bad behavior, to determine crime, to determine terrorism, to really control the population. And I know it sounds so Orwellian, it sounds science fiction even to say these things, and yet that has been the primary focus of companies like Amazon over the last few years, has been to really delve deep into AI. The CIA is heavily funding these efforts in order to have predictive technology that will determine outcomes, but it is a very, very slippery slope.
Investigative journalist Ben Swann, thank you so much. Perhaps sometimes the truth is stranger than fiction.
Michelle, thank you.
I'm Rick Sanchez. You found us on YouTube, and that's awesome. But you know what? I'm also live every night at 7 and 8 p.m. Eastern on DirecTV and Dish and cable and satellite, the RT app, and Pluto TV. I'll see you there.